June 1986, Bensenville, Illinois. Tony Spilotro walked into a basement with 15 men already waiting. There was no ceremony, no promotion. Only a room that closed behind him and a decision already made. The story makes it look sudden, but it began years earlier in Las Vegas, Nevada, where the Chicago outfit moved money quietly through casinos, and Spilotro was sent to keep it invisible. Then the pattern changed. Pressure, exposure, internal risk. And when the balance shifts, options disappear. The question is, what changed inside that system that made his survival impossible? Chicago's investment, Las Vegas, Nevada, 1971. Las Vegas, Nevada, 1971. The Chicago outfit didn't send Tony Spilotro west to make noise. They sent him to protect something far more valuable than territory: a steady flow of cash. Casinos were generating millions, and a portion of that money was quietly diverted before it ever reached official records. Spilotro's role was precise: enforce discipline, keep operations controlled, make sure nothing drew attention. The outfit had already placed trusted figures inside the casinos, including Frank Rosenthal, who managed day-to-day activity. Together, the system worked like a business. Clear roles, one objective: move money without being seen. Violence wasn't the priority. Control was. Every unnecessary move risked exposure. Regulators and federal agencies were always watching, even if quietly. The system depended on one rule: nothing unusual should stand out. For Spilotro, this wasn't a promotion. It was a test. Could he operate within limits? Could he protect a system where power came from staying invisible? At first, he did. The money moved. The structure held. And Las Vegas became one of the outfit's most profitable operations because it stayed out of sight. The skim system. How money moved without record. The system itself was simple in concept, but precise in execution. Inside the casinos, cash flowed constantly. Slot machines, table games, private rooms. Before those earnings were officially counted, a portion was quietly removed. Not stolen in the chaotic sense, but extracted with consistency by people who were already part of the operation. The count rooms were central to this process. Employees loyal to the outfit handled the money before it entered the books. Small amounts taken regularly added up to significant totals over time. There was no need for large, risky moves. The strength of the system came from repetition and control. Once removed, the cash had to leave Las Vegas without creating a trail. Couriers transported it, sometimes in suitcases, sometimes hidden among legitimate shipments. Routes varied, methods changed when necessary. The goal was always the same: keep the flow steady and unnoticeable until it reached Chicago. What made this operation effective wasn't force, it was discipline. Everyone involved understood the balance. The more invisible the process remained, the longer it could continue. Any disruption, an arrest, a suspicious pattern, an unexpected audit could expose everything. This is why the outfit valued control over aggression. A single reckless move could attract the kind of attention that money alone couldn't silence. The system didn't rely on fear to survive. It relied on consistency, routine, and the absence of mistakes. For a time, it worked exactly as intended. Money moved, records stayed clean, and from the outside, nothing seemed out of place. The first deviation: when an asset becomes a risk. Las Vegas was supposed to be quiet. That was the understanding when Tony Spilotro arrived. The job was simple on paper: protect the flow, avoid attention, keep everything steady. For a while, he followed that line. Then the pattern began to change. Instead of staying within the system, Spilotro started building something on the side. Burglary crews, independent jobs, operations that had nothing to do with the casino skim. One of the groups later tied to him became known as the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang, breaking into homes and businesses across Las Vegas. Each job brought in money, but it also created noise. That was the problem. The outfit didn't need extra income from risky street-level crimes. They were already pulling in far more through the casinos. What they needed was stability. Every additional operation increased the chances of exposure. More people involved, more movement, more chances for something to go wrong. Inside the organization, this shift didn't go unnoticed. Spilotro wasn't just stepping outside his role. He was putting the larger system at risk. The same qualities that once made him valuable: aggression, initiative, willingness to act, were now becoming liabilities. In a structure built on control, unpredictability is dangerous. It forces others to adjust, to compensate, to clean up problems they didn't create. And over time, that changes how an asset is viewed. He was still trusted, still in position, but the first doubts had started to form. If this kind of analysis interests you, consider subscribing. Exposure, federal pressure, and surveillance expansion. Once attention begins, it rarely moves backward. In Las Vegas, law enforcement had already been watching the casinos, quietly, patiently, building files over time. Spilotro's side operations gave them something clearer to focus on. The Federal Bureau of Investigation began tightening its surveillance. Informants were placed closer to the crews. Movements were tracked. Conversations were monitored. What had once been background observations started turning into targeted pressure. The burglary operations played a key role in that shift. They were easier to investigate than the skim, which was designed to leave no trace. Street-level crimes created witnesses, evidence, and patterns. Each case added another layer to the larger picture forming around Spilotro. This wasn't just about arrests. It was about visibility. The more his name appeared in reports, the closer law enforcement moved toward the casino operations he was supposed to protect. That connection was the real threat. Once the link between street activity and casino management became clear, the entire system could be exposed. Inside the outfit, the risk was no longer theoretical. Federal pressure changes timelines. It forces decisions earlier than expected. It limits options. Spilotro hadn't been removed. Not yet, but the environment around him had shifted. The space for mistakes was shrinking, and the cost of each one was getting higher. Personal becomes political. The Rosenthal conflict, Las Vegas, Nevada, early 1980s. Up to this point, the pressure surrounding Tony Spilotro had been building in a predictable way. Surveillance, investigations, growing attention from federal agencies. These were risks the outfit understood. They had systems to manage them. But what came next was different. It didn't come from outside. It came from within. Frank Rosenthal was not just another figure in Las Vegas. He was central to the casino operation. He oversaw daily activity, controlled the flow of money, and acted as the public-facing layer of a system that depended on staying invisible. More importantly, he was trusted by Chicago. When Spilotro crossed that line through his involvement with Rosenthal's wife, it didn't remain a personal matter. In this environment, personal decisions carry operational consequences. Relationships are part of the structure. Once that trust is broken, the damage doesn't stay contained. This wasn't speculation. Later investigations and reporting highlighted how this conflict deepened internal fractures and contributed to how Spilotro was viewed inside the organization. What this created wasn't just tension. It created instability between two key figures. Coordination becomes harder. Communication becomes uncertain. And in a system where consistency is everything, even small disruptions can ripple outward. At the same time, federal pressure was already increasing. Wiretaps were active. Informants were closer. Investigations were becoming specific. Now, internal conflict was intersecting with external scrutiny. That overlap is where problems grow. What had once been a controlled operation was beginning to fracture, not through one major failure, but through a series of smaller breakdowns that were starting to connect. The cost calculation. When loyalty ends, Chicago, Illinois, mid-1980s. By now, the situation had moved beyond concern. It had become a calculation. Legal pressure was no longer distant. Investigations tied to Las Vegas were leading to indictments. Names connected to the operation were appearing in courtrooms and federal reports. A system that once stayed invisible was starting to surface. At the center of that shift was Spilotro. Each issue on its own might have been manageable. Side operations, increased attention, internal conflict, but together they formed a pattern. One that pointed to instability inside an operation built on control. For the outfit, loyalty was never separate from function. Value was measured in results, steady revenue, minimal exposure, consistent structure. When those conditions changed, so did the evaluation. Spilotro's role hadn't changed publicly, but internally, the perception had shifted. He was no longer just managing operations. He had become a link connecting federal pressure to a system that depended on staying unseen. In that kind of environment, timing is critical. Act too early, and you create disruption. Wait too long, and the risk grows. By the mid-1980s, that balance was becoming difficult to justify. The question was no longer whether there was a problem. It was whether keeping him in place cost more than removing him, and how long the system could afford to wait. The vote? Chicago, Illinois, mid-1980s. Chicago, Illinois, mid-1980s. Decisions like this were never made in public. No records, no formal minutes. Just a small group of senior figures weighing a problem that had been building for years. By now, the situation around Tony Spilotro had become difficult to defend. Federal attention was no longer distant. Investigations tied to Las Vegas were moving forward, and names connected to the operation were appearing in indictments. The same system that once operated quietly was now visible in ways it was never meant to be. Inside the outfit, this triggered a different kind of response. Not emotional, not impulsive, measured. The discussion was not about who Spilotro had been, but what he represented now. His role in Las Vegas had shifted. Instead of protecting the flow of money, he had become a point of exposure, a connection between law enforcement pressure and a system that depended on staying out of sight. In structured organizations, even illegal ones, decisions often follow a simple logic: cost versus benefit. If an asset continues to produce value, it remains protected. If it begins to threaten the system, that protection weakens. By the mid-1980s, that balance had changed. The question was no longer whether Spilotro had been useful. That part was already understood. The question was whether keeping him in place carried more risk than removing him. At some point, that calculation reaches a conclusion. No announcement follows, no visible shift. But internally, the decision is made, quietly, without reversal. And once that line is crossed, the outcome is no longer uncertain. It's only a matter of how it will be carried out. The setup. A promotion that leads to a trap. Once the decision was made, the next step was control. Not confrontation, not open conflict. Control. Spilotro could not simply be removed in a direct way. By this point, he was aware of the pressure around him. Federal surveillance, internal tension, none of it was hidden anymore. Any sudden move risked resistance or attention the outfit wanted to avoid. So the approach had to feel routine, familiar, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. The solution came through structure itself. Spilotro and his brother were told to attend a meeting tied to advancement, a formal step forward. In that world, such ceremonies carried meaning. They were rare, controlled, and difficult to refuse. Refusing wasn't neutral. It signaled distrust, and distrust had consequences of its own. So the meeting remained the safest option. The location was set in Bensenville, Illinois, a quiet area, removed from attention. The environment was controlled from the moment they arrived. Picked up, transported, led into a space where everything had already been arranged. There was no ceremony waiting, only a room prepared in advance, with men already in position. Accounts documented later, including case summaries and historical records, confirmed that this meeting was used as a setup to bring him into a controlled environment where the outcome had already been decided. The system didn't rely on force to bring him there. It relied on expectation, hierarchy, and the understanding that certain invitations cannot be ignored. By the time Spilotro stepped inside, the outcome was already fixed. What remained was execution, not of a plan in motion, but of a decision made long before he arrived. Final thought: after the burial, power, replacement, and what remained. In the weeks after June 1986, the burial closed one chapter, but exposed a deeper shift. The Las Vegas skim, once steady and quiet, began to unravel under federal cases and tighter oversight. Without the same structure, the flow slowed, then fractured. No single figure stepped in to replace Tony Spilotro. The role itself had become too visible. The Chicago outfit adjusted the only way it could, by pulling back, reducing exposure, and protecting what remained. It was no longer expansion, it was containment. Removing one man solved an immediate problem, but it also marked the end of an approach that had worked for years. The system survived, but not in the same form. Less visible, less ambitious, more cautious. It leaves a harder question behind. In a structure built on control, what matters more, loyalty or usefulness? And once that balance shifts, how long does anyone really have? If you want more stories drawn from records and trial evidence, subscribe and follow along.